Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on any purchase over $10. See the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again to recap the results of the major events from the weekend. And we have a lot to talk about. MagicFest Los Angeles had a Modern Grand Prix. Star City Games in Syracuse included a Legacy Open, a Standard, Modern, and Legacy Classic. As always, we will have a special focus on the latest Standard set, and in this case, it is still Ravnica Allegiance as we go through the results and deck lists today. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support us. Our Patreon page is down there. Also, you'll find product links to things on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, no matter what it is, we'll get a small percentage if you go through that link. Finally, you saw at the top of the show, Flipside Gaming always giving a promo code for our viewers. Good way to save some cash while you help us out too. But as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to each and every one of you. You all make the channel what it is, so thank you, and let's get into it. We're going to begin, as we always do, with Standard. This is the Star City Games Classic Standard event that occurred in Syracuse. Here is your top 8 from that event. Coming in first, as well as 7th, Simic Nexus, or Star City Games referred to it here, Slimic Nexus. Second place, Sultai Midrange, that also came in 4th place. Third place, Rakdos Aggro. 5th place, Gruul Aggro. 6th place, Azorius Aggro. 8th place, Mono Blue Aggro, or Mono Blue Tempo, as many refer to it as. Alright, let's start breaking down some of these deck lists. Here's your first place Simic Nexus deck. It feels like the Simic variety of this deck has begun to rise to the top now that we are a number of weeks into the format. The other variants are still kicking around out there, and every once in a while one of those can still put up a good result. We're going to look at one of them a little bit later in the video, as a matter of fact. But Simic really feels like it's the one that everybody is starting to gravitate to at this point. So let's look at the deck. Is it much different from what we've seen in previous weeks? No, not really. For search for his content, your particular build, you have your core Hero 4 Nexus of Fate, 4 Root Snare, and a number of cards from the new set. And here they are. These are the cards that were in the main deck. You get a copy of Frilled Mystic. Not all the Simic Nexus decks are doing that, but this one was. Hydroid Crisis. Okay, pretty much all the Simic Nexus decks are doing that. Growth Spiral. Wilderness Reclamation. This card has really pushed this style of deck. And finally, Breeding Pool. Out of the sideboard, Biogenic Ooze. Okay, here's the deck list for that second place Sultai Midrange deck, and if you were familiar with Golgari Midrange from the previous season, this deck is going to look pretty familiar to you. Why do you want to work some blue into your Golgari Midrange deck? Well, Hostage Taker is one good reason. We'll look at the other really good reason in just a few moments, but this deck does have 3 copies of that card in the main. Other than that, though, you're going to see a very familiar deck list, right? 4 Llanowar Elves, 4 Merfolk Branchwalkers, 4 Wildgrowth Walker, 3 Vivian Reed. That feels pretty standard in all these builds now, right there in the main. You got some cast downs, Vraska's Contempt, Find a Finality. Alright, let's take a look at our cards from Ravnica Allegiance that are here. Incubation Druid, the other really good reason to run blue in this deck, and that's Hydroid Crisis and Breeding Pool. Now, this deck was not doing it, but many times you will find Cry of the Carnarium out of the sideboard. The Sultai Midrange deck that came in 4th place was running 1 copy of this in its board. Okay, 3rd place was Rakdos Aggro. Now, this is starting to lean a little bit towards the larger side with 2 Rekindling Phoenixes, but it is still pretty much a Rakdos Aggro deck. You got a lot of small creatures here. 4 Runaway Steamkin, 4 Get 2 Lava Runner, 4 Goblin Chain Whirler, of course, very popular card in these type of builds. Also notice 4 Experimental Frenzy right there in the main. You also have some of your burn spells like Lightning Strikes, 4 of those, 4 Shocks. 1 Wizard's Lightning. Go over to the sideboard, you're going to find your Lava Coils there, 4 of those. Also a treasure map in the sideboard, a risk factor. There's also 1 Angroth the Flame Chains. Let's take a look at the cards from Ravnica Allegiance, though. You have Rixmati Reveler, Light Up the Stage, and Blood Crypt. Okay, 5th place, Gruul Aggro. Now, they called this one Gruul Aggro, but honestly, this feels more like a Gruul midrange deck to me because it is going kind of large. 4 Rekindling Phoenix, 3 Siege Gang Commander. There's a Planeswalker, 2 copies in the main. We'll talk about him in just a few moments. Then you have some of your quick burn spells too, like 4 Lightning Strikes, 4 Shocks. If you go to the sideboard, this copy of the deck is running 3 Treasure Maps. You also have a couple Legion War Bosses in there, 2 copies of the Immortal Sun. Again, you find your Lava Coils in the side, but 4 of them. Here are the cards from Ravnica Allegiance, 2 copies of Domri Chaosbringer. Fans of that card are probably relieved to see this because Up until this point, a lot of these Gruul decks were doing well without that card. Well, here's one that put up a nice result with this card. Now you also have Growth Chamber Guardian in here, Gruul Spellbreaker, which I think is very underrated, Collision Colossus, Gruul Guildgate, and Stomping Ground. Out of the sideboard, Cindervines. 6th place, Azorius Aggro. How Azorius? Is this Azorius Aggro deck? Well, not super Azorius. For the most part, it is a white deck. Look at the main deck. As a matter of fact, it looks very familiar, right? If you played maybe or played against that mono white aggro deck last season. 4 copies of Benalish Marshal, 2 Adanto Vanguard, you got 4 Venerated Loxodon, a copy of Ajani here in the main, 2 copies in the sideboard, 4 Legion's Landing, 4 History of Benalia. The blue does give you access to control elements out of the sideboard here, things like Disdainful Stroke and Negate, another card we're going to look at in just a few seconds too. But let's go ahead and look at those Ravnica Allegiance cards. 4 copies of Tithe Taker in the main, that seems more and more common with this build, and Hallowed Fountain. Out of the sideboard, a good reason to play some blue here, Deputy of Detention, just 1 copy in this build though. 8th place, Mono Blue Aggro or Mono Blue Tempo. This is the deck type that came in first place at the Mythic Championship. And again, a deck that has been around for a while, but it did get some upgrades from the Ravnica Allegiance set. The core of the deck is still similar. 4 Tempest Djinn, 4 Siren Storm Tamer, 2 Mistcloaked Herald in this build, 4 Merfolk Trickster, 4 Dive Down, 4 Opt, 3 Spell Pierce. Out of the sideboard, you do have 3 Entrancing Melody, which is kind of an answer to Hydroid Crisis. It doesn't do anything about the card draw or the life gain, but it can take that creature for a pretty reasonable cost and turn it against your opponent, which is kind of nice. Now, when you look at the Ravnica Allegiance cards, Terramander has been a big influence on this deck, 4 copies here, and Essence Scatter makes the main as well. And you'll find an additional copy in the sideboard. Alright, let's move out of the top 8 and look at some decks that have performed well that we haven't looked at yet, and one of those is Esper Control that came in 9th place. This is the deck type that came in 2nd place a week ago now at the Mythic Championship, so yeah, it can put up some good results. And if we look at this build, it's a little different from what we've been seeing. But let's look at some of the main cards first. 4 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, of course, in this build. You're going to find things like Cast Down, Chemister's Insight, Negates are in here, 2 Search for Iskanta, 2 Vraska's Contempt. The sideboard does allow you to bring in more creatures. Things like Hostage Taker, 3 of those. 4 Thief of Sanity. You even have 2 Lyra Dawmbringers here. But one thing I really want to point out. Here's your Ravnica Allegiance cards, and notice that Kaya Orzhov Usurper moved from 1 copy in the side, which we saw in a lot of builds a week ago, to 1 copy in the main, and the deck performed well, so I think we're going to see more of her in the future. Cry of the Carnarium is here. Kaya's Wrath, probably the best reason to go Esper Control over other color combinations right now. Absorb is here, Mortify, Godless Shrine, and Hallowed Fountain. Out of the sideboard, another copy of Cry of the Carnarium. 11th place is Phoenix, another deck that we saw top 8 the Mythic Championship a week ago. And this is the version of the deck that is pretty much the same as it was last season. This is also the Goblin Electromancer variant of this type of deck. You're going to find 4 of those in here, not to mention, of course, 4 Arclight Phoenix, 4 Crackling Drake, a copy of Ral is at Viceroy in the main, another one in the sideboard, a couple Niv Miz Apparents in the sideboard as well. 2 Entrancing Melody show up in the side and 1 in the main. And you got your cheap spells, of course, your Ops, your Radical Ideas, your Shocks, so on and so forth. What's new? Well, Ravnica Allegiance brings us 1 copy of Blood Crypt. Basically, this is here if I want to play the Dispersal side of Discovery Dispersal. Now, at 15th place, we have another Nexus deck. This time it is Nexus of Gates. This is kind of a hybrid of a Nexus deck and those Gate strategies we were seeing early on in the format that have kind of fallen off now. But let's take a quick look at the cards here for Nexus of Fate, of course. You're going to have some cards that care about gates and gates in your mana base. Things like Guild Summoner here, another card we're going to look at in just a few moments as well. There's 3 Expansion Explosions, which is worth noting, but let's take a look at the Ravnica Allegiance cards because that's where you're going to find the big action here. And maybe no bigger payoff in the format right now than the 4 copies of Hydroid Crisis you're going to find here. You have a card looking for gates with Gates Ablaze, you have Growth Spiral here, of course Wilderness Reclamation, Azorius Guildgate, Breeding Pool, Gruul Guildgate, Plaza of Harmony, and Simic Guildgate. Out of the sideboard, another card that helps you go deeper with the gate strategy, that is 4 copies of Gatebreaker Ram. You also will find Frilled Mystic here. Okay, that was our look at Standard. Let's move on to Modern, and we're going to take a slight detour and go over to MagicFest Los Angeles and see what the top 8 was in the Modern Grand Prix. Phoenix came in 1st and 8th, Hardened Scales Affinity came in 2nd and 4th. Dredge came in 3rd and 7th. Titan Shift came in 5th. Grixis Death Shadow came in 6th. Okay, so most of these decks haven't really evolved all that much recently. However, I do want to look at that Is It Phoenix deck real quick that came in 1st place. Here it is. You have 4 copies of Arclight Phoenix, 2 Crackling Drake, 4 Thing in the Ice, a lot of cheap spells, Gutshot, Metamorphose, Optus here. You have 4 Lightning Bolts. Not too different from what we have been seeing. However, there is a card from Ravnica Allegiance that made it into the main here. And that is Pteramander with 2 copies. Okay, back to Syracuse for the Star City Games Classic, and this top 8 was a little more diverse. 1st place, War Prison. 2nd place, Amulet Titan. 3rd place, Ad Nauseam. 4th place, Orzhov Tokens. 5th place, Grixis Death Shadow. 6th place, Humans. 7th place, Jeskai Control. 8th place, Mono Green Tron. Again, most of the deck lists haven't changed a whole lot from what we've seen in previous weeks, but I do want to point out that Humans deck in 6th place. Here it is, and yeah, at first glance, sure, it looks like a Humans deck like we have been seeing, but there is a card from Ravnica Allegiance in the main here. It's just 1 copy of Deputy of Detention. This isn't a human, but good enough to make the cut. Okay, let's move on to that Legacy Open now. Here's your top 8. Is It Delver comes in 1st as well as 5th. Golgari Depths comes in 2nd place. 3rd place, Rakdos Reanimator. 4th place, Azorius Delver. 6th place, Grixis Control. 7th place, Mono Red Prison. 8th place, Miracles. Okay, so do you think any Ravnica Allegiance cards crossed over into Legacy? Actually, yes, we did see a few decks running them. And here's a great example of that with the 1st place Is It Delver deck. If you're familiar with this kind of build, okay, for the most part, this deck is not going to be too surprising. But there are 2 cards in the main from Ravnica Allegiance, and those include 4 copies of Pteramander. So yes, Pteramander is here in Legacy too, and 3 copies of Light Up the Stage. Alright, let's move out of the top 8 and look at another deck that performed pretty well. This is the Azorius Stoneblade deck that came in 18th place. Now this deck has evolved a little bit recently. You see in this particular version, there's 1 copy of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in the main. You also notice a friend of his there, 3 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor. Out of the sideboard, there's another Planeswalker, a copy of Gideon, ally of Zendikar. But what does Ravnica Allegiance contribute here? 2 copies of Lavinia Azorius Renegade. Now, this is tech that is starting to take hold within this deck. As a matter of fact, there was another Azorius Stoneblade deck which came in 5th place in the Legacy Classic. We'll look at those results in just a moment. They were running 1 copy of this out of the sideboard. So there is a chance we'll see more of this in the future. Alright, here's that Legacy Classic event, and your top 8 is Miracles coming in 1st place. Storm came in 2nd. Grixis Delver came in 3rd as well as 7th. Elves came in 4th. Azorius Stoneblade came in 5th. Grixis Death Shadow came in 6th. Maverick came in 8th. Now, we already talked about the Azorius Stoneblade deck, but there are a couple decks that performed well outside of the top 8 that were also running cards from Ravnica Allegiance. 9th place was Burn, and yeah, Burn decks have been trying to adapt some of the new cards. What's this one doing? Well, you're going to notice alongside the Lightning Bolts and Lava Spikes and Rift Bolts, you're going to find 4 copies of Skewer the Critics. Out of the sideboard, Cindervines. 14th place is Azorius Control. You have a number of Planeswalkers here too in the main. 2 Gideon of the Trials, 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 2 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. A lot of control cards, no surprise there. But there is 1 card from Ravnica Allegiance. 1 copy of Absorb made it here. Now, this of course was a reprint, but it was not legal in Modern until the printing in this set. So will we see more of this in the future? Time will tell. Alright, with that being said, that is our wrap up of the weekend. Hope it was helpful to you. Until next time though, please remember to like and subscribe and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon and have a great day.